"You're not coming back in," my daughter said, her hand tight on the bathroom door handle. I was still sitting in the tub, warm water around my shoulders, staring at the empty space where my clothes had been a moment ago. She had taken them, all of them, and walked out without waiting for my answer. The sound of her heels faded down the hall, swallowed by the music from the party I was supposed to attend. For a few seconds, I just sat there, dripping and blinking at the pale steam curling in the air. The humiliation hit me first, sharp, hot, impossible to hide even from myself. Then came the confusion. Why? I'd been invited. This was supposed to be my granddaughter's big night. I'd chosen my best skirt, the one with the neat pleats and the soft navy blouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it was me. Apparently, that was the problem. I reached for the towel on the radiator, wrapping it around me like a shield. Through the thin door, I could hear laughter, glasses clinking, the sound of forks on china. My party, my family, my blood. And here I was, stripped, exiled, as if I were some stranger who had wandered in by mistake. It wasn't always like this with Claire. There was a time when she would call every other day, asking me how to make beef stew the way her father liked it, or just to tell me some silly story about her work at the library. When her marriage fell apart, I was the one who held her while she cried on my couch. I gave her my bedroom so she could sleep in peace, and I took the sofa without complaint. But over the years, things shifted in ways I didn't notice at first. She remarried to a man who wore polished cufflinks and never looked at me for more than a second when he shook my hand. She moved into a bigger house, the kind with a driveway that curves like it's posing for a magazine photo. My phone rang less often. The visits became rare, quick, almost like errands. And each time I came over, there was something in her eyes, a flicker, a tightening, that made me wonder if I'd worn the wrong shoes or said the wrong thing. Money was the one thread that kept us tied. When Claire and Matthew wanted to redo their kitchen, I wrote the check. When the car needed replacing, I found a way. I told myself it was just helping my child, what any mother would do. I never put conditions on it, never asked for repayment. My husband, God rest him, used to say, "Marion, you give until your hands are empty, and then you give the gloves too." He meant it as a compliment, but I see now how dangerous it can be. This party, my granddaughter Lily's engagement celebration, was supposed to be a bright spot. The first time in years we'd all be in the same room, laughing, eating, making the kind of memories I could carry into my quiet evenings. I'd even splurged on a hair appointment. The stylist fussed over my silver hair, saying it shone like frost in the sunlight. I felt, well, not young, but presentable, important enough to be seen. Claire had called 2 weeks ago to make sure I had the date right. Her voice had been sugary, almost too careful. "It's a big night, Mom. Lots of Matthew's colleagues will be there, and Lily's future in-laws. We want everything to look perfect." I told her I understood, that I'd wear something simple. I even tried on half my closet to make sure nothing looked shabby. And yet, here I was, dripping water onto the bath mat, staring at the empty hook where my skirt had been. The message couldn't have been clearer. "You don't fit the picture we're painting tonight." I don't know if she thought I'd cry quietly and wait until everyone left, or if she imagined I'd be too ashamed to show my face. I thought about the last family dinner I'd attended at her house. It was Thanksgiving, and I'd brought my cranberry sauce in the same chipped bowl I'd used for 30 years. Halfway through the meal, Matthew had taken it to the kitchen and brought it back in a white porcelain dish to match the table. Claire had smiled tightly at him, then at me, as if to say, "Don't make a fuss." I didn't. I never did. But tonight, with the bass of the music pulsing faintly through the floor, something in me felt tired. Not the usual end-of-the-day tired. A deeper kind. Like the kind you feel in your bones when you've carried too much for too long. I thought of Lily. Sweet Lily, who used to braid my hair when she was little, sitting on my lap for hours while we watched old movies. She'd told me once, at 12 years old, that when she grew up, she wanted to be exactly like Grandma, calm and never scared of anything. What would she think if she knew I was sitting here, wrapped in a towel, letting her mother lock me away from her special night? From the hallway, a sudden burst of laughter rose, followed by someone calling for a toast. I could picture them all, dressed in soft lights, champagne in hand, smiling for photos that would later be posted online with captions about family and love. The towel clung to my damp skin as I stood up, my knees protesting. I opened the cabinet under the sink, not even sure what I was looking for. Another robe, maybe a spare dress I'd forgotten. Instead, I found an old hairbrush, some soap, and a few crumpled guest towels. No help there. Then my eyes drifted to the wardrobe in the guest bedroom. It wasn't mine, but I knew what was inside. Lily's extra clothes. She'd been staying here for a few days before moving into her own apartment. And somewhere in there, I remembered, was a dress she'd shown me just yesterday. Soft rose-pink satin with little pearl buttons down the back. She'd called it her backup dress in case she spilled something on the first one. The thought came quick and dangerous. If I can't wear my own clothes, I'll wear hers. Not to mock her, not to cause a scene, but because I would not, at 74, sit in a locked bathroom and miss the only party I'd been looking forward to all year. I padded to the wardrobe, heart thudding, not from fear, but from a strange, bubbling energy I hadn't felt in years. The satin felt cool under my fingers as I lifted it from the hanger. It was too young for me, too soft, too obviously meant for someone else. But as I held it up against me, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time that night, I smiled. The dress was tighter than anything I'd worn in years. I had to wrestle the zipper halfway, then give up and let it sit open just a bit in the back. The sleeves were short, leaving the soft crepe of my upper arms bare, and the skirt brushed just below my knees. The satin caught the light from the bathroom, turning that pale rose into something almost luminous. It wasn't me. Not the me my family was used to anyway. But as I stood there barefoot, my wet hair curling into uneven waves around my face, I thought maybe that was the point. Maybe they needed to see me as someone they couldn't quietly fold away like an old blanket. From the wardrobe floor, I dug out a pair of low-heeled silver shoes Lily had worn to a school dance. They were half a size too big, but I stuffed tissue into the toes and made them work. The mirror told me I looked unusual, yes, but not pitiful, and that was all I cared about. When I opened the bathroom door, the cooler air of the hallway rushed in, carrying the scent of roasted meat, perfume, and candle wax. The music was louder here, and so was the chatter. I paused, listening, as my daughter's voice floated from the kitchen, clipped, efficient, the tone she used when she was arranging flowers or giving instructions to waitstaff. For a moment, I almost turned back. I could imagine the look on Claire's face, the tightening of her lips, the careful way she'd step in front of me and steer me toward a quiet corner, murmuring that this wasn't the time. I'd seen that look before, at other gatherings, when my presence didn't quite match the image she wanted. But then I thought about the months leading up to tonight. The way she had spoken of perfect seating arrangements and aesthetic flow, as if her own mother was just another piece of decor to be managed. The way she'd never once asked what I might want to wear, or if I needed help getting there. The way, just half an hour ago, she'd taken my clothes and closed me out. I stepped forward. My shoes made a soft sound on the hardwood, a steady click that matched the beat of the music. The living room came into view first. Clusters of people with glasses in their hands, soft laughter rippling between them. No one noticed me at first, which was just as well. I moved toward the dining room archway, my eyes sweeping over the sea of faces. And there, by the far wall, was Lily. Her hair was swept into a loose knot, a strand falling against her cheek. She wore a cream dress now, not the rose satin, and she was laughing at something a tall young man, her fiancé, was saying. She looked happy, and for that I was grateful. When her eyes found me, she froze. For a heartbeat, we simply stared at each other, her mouth parting, my chin lifting just a fraction. Then she smiled, sudden and wide, like a child seeing a favorite person walk through the door. "Grandma!" she called over the music, moving toward me. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Claire, at the buffet table, looked up, and the expression that crossed her face was something between shock and horror. Lily reached me first, her hands warm on my arms. "You look..." She paused, eyes sparkling, with a mix of amusement and admiration. "You look incredible." I could feel every pair of eyes in the room now. Some curious, some amused, a few politely puzzled. Claire was threading her way through the crowd, her smile stretched thin, her gaze sharp. "Mother," she said when she reached us, her voice low but cutting through the hum of the room. "Can I have a word?" I held Lily's hands a moment longer before gently letting go. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone even. But inside, I was already bracing myself. Claire led me toward the hallway, away from the chatter and the music. Her grip on my elbow was light but unyielding. "What?" she began, each word clipped. "Are you doing?" I met her eyes. "Attending my granddaughter's engagement party." "In that?" Her glance flicked over the dress, the shoes, my still damp hair. "Mother, this isn't funny. That's Lily's dress, and you're making this awkward." I almost laughed. Awkward? After locking me away in a bathroom like an unwanted guest? But I said nothing yet. I wanted her to fill the silence, to show me exactly where she thought I belonged tonight. She glanced back toward the dining room, then leaned closer. "Please, just go upstairs. I'll bring you a plate later." There it was, that quiet exile she'd perfected over the years. Only this time, I wasn't going quietly. I looked at my daughter the way you might look at a stranger who just used your first name without permission. "Go upstairs?" I repeated, as if I'd misheard. Claire pressed her lips together. "Please, Mother, this is not the moment for statements." The word statements rolled in the air like an insult wrapped in silk. I let out a slow breath. I didn't come here to make one. I came here because my granddaughter invited me. "She didn't know," Claire began, then stopped. A quick glance toward the dining room, a nervous adjustment of her necklace. "This is a delicate evening. There are people here who might see me," I finished for her, "in my old skirt and blouse, and think less of you." Her eyes flickered. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both knew. For years I had allowed these small, careful exclusions. the forgetting to introduce me to her colleagues, the maybe next time when I suggested joining a family trip, the seat at the far end of the table where conversation barely reached. And every time I told myself it was nothing, that she was busy, that I was imagining it, that she loved me, just in her own way. But tonight, dripping from the bath and wrapped in a towel while my family toasted without me, something cracked. The patience, the excuses, they were gone. I took a step closer so she had to tilt her head up to meet my eyes. Claire, I am not going upstairs. I am not leaving. If this dress bothers you, take it up with Lily. She offered it to me, in spirit if not in words, when you decided I wasn't fit to be seen. Her cheeks colored. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice low but steady. I understand that you think I'm some extra, something to be hidden when the picture has to be perfect. I understand that you've mistaken my kindness for weakness. And I understand that you've forgotten who paid for your first apartment, your first car, and most of this very night. Her breath caught. You don't want to talk about that here? I smiled, just enough to keep her guessing. Then don't. I'm going back in there. And I did. I walked past her, through the archway, into the warm light of the dining room. A few people looked up as I passed, offering polite nods, curious glances. Lily, still glowing, caught my hand as I moved toward the table. Come sit with us, Grandma, she said, her voice bright, unaware of the storm in the hallway. I sat, and for the next half hour, I listened. I listened to Lily talk about her new apartment, to Matthew's colleagues exchange stories about some business trip, to the polite laughter that floated over the table. I even laughed once or twice myself, though it felt like someone else's voice. Across the room, Claire kept glancing at me, her smile just a little too tight each time our eyes met. I wondered if she was calculating how soon she could usher me out without making a scene. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. It's strange how you can sit in a room full of people and still feel like you're watching through a pane of glass. The laughter and chatter reached my ears, but it seemed to pass over me, like sunlight falling on the wrong side of a curtain. I sipped at the champagne Lily had pressed into my hand, the bubbles tickling my nose. From my seat near the end of the table, I could see everyone. Lily glowing beside her fiancé, Matthew with his permanent air of polite boredom, and Claire moving between guests like a hostess in a magazine spread. She was in her element here, all smooth smiles and practiced warmth. I was about to take another sip when a snippet of conversation floated toward me from the pair seated behind. A man's voice, older, confident, said, "Well, it's a smart move, putting the place in her name. Keeps things tidy when the time comes." A woman laughed softly. "Oh, Matthews thought it all through. Claire said it'll be easier once they have full control. No mess with probate, no awkward family claims." They weren't speaking loudly, but it was the kind of quiet you use when you don't think the person concerned is anywhere nearby. I froze, the glass hovering at my lips. The place? My house? The only thing in my name besides my savings? I shifted slightly in my chair, as if adjusting my skirt, and caught more. She's 74. It's not like she needs much now. Just make sure she's comfortable, you know? Then, when... A pause, the man lowering his voice. "You can get the renovation started." The woman murmured something I didn't catch. Then they both laughed softly. My chest felt tight, not with shock, but with a kind of weary recognition. So that's what it was. Not just about tonight, not about a dress or a perfect evening. It was about making sure I stayed out of sight and maybe, eventually, out of the way. I'd heard hints before. Claire once mentioned streamlining my affairs, a word that made my skin prickle. Matthew had offered to help with my accounts, smiling as if it were a kindness. I'd laughed it off, told them I was quite capable. But now, hearing strangers discuss my future like it was a project in their hands, something in me stiffened. Lily's voice pulled me back. "Grandma, you haven't touched your food." She leaned closer, her eyes concerned. "I'm fine, darling," I said, forcing a smile. "Just enjoying the company." She smiled back, though her brow stayed furrowed. She had always been quick to sense when something wasn't right. When she was little, if I was having a bad day, she'd bring me a flower from the garden without a word. Across the table, Claire caught my gaze again. This time, her smile didn't even try to reach her eyes. I set my glass down carefully, the stem cool against my fingertips. I thought of all the checks I'd written over the years, the way I'd told myself it was love, it was family, it was what mothers did. I thought of the times I'd been left out, brushed aside, handled like a problem to be managed. And I thought about the bath earlier tonight, about standing there in that towel while my daughter walked away with my clothes. Something in me settled then, not in defeat, but in decision. I wouldn't say anything tonight. Not here, not in front of Lily. But before this week was over, I was going to make sure Claire and Matthew understood exactly where I stood and where my money would no longer be going. Lily caught up with me near the dessert table. "Grandma," she said quietly, "can we talk for a second?" Her voice was low enough that the clink of cutlery and hum of conversation almost swallowed it. She took my hand, warm and steady, and guided me toward a little alcove near the back door, away from the crowd. "What's going on?" she asked. "You seem different tonight. Not upset exactly, but—" She tilted her head, searching my face. "And why are you wearing my dress?" I almost told her the truth in a rush, that her mother had taken my clothes while I bathed, that I'd been left with nothing but a towel, that I'd overheard strangers casually discussing my house like it was a prize waiting to be claimed. But I didn't want my words to sour her night. "Your dress?" I smiled faintly. "It was hanging in the wardrobe. It looked like it might have a nice time tonight, so I borrowed it." Lily's brows knitted. "You mean Mom didn't give it to you?" I shook my head. Her eyes darted toward the crowd, where Claire was laughing at something Matthew had said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Lily's lips pressed into a thin line. "She told me earlier you'd decided not to come," Lily said slowly, "that you'd been feeling tired." There it was. The lie. Dressed up neat enough to pass in polite company. I felt the old familiar ache, the one that comes from realizing how many stories have been spun in your absence. "I wanted to be here," I said simply, "and here I am." Lily stared at me a moment longer, as if weighing whether to press for more. In the end, she just squeezed my hand. "Well, I'm glad you are." Her eyes softened. "Don't let her push you away tonight, okay? It's my party too." I nodded, but the truth was already shaping itself in my mind. Tonight wasn't the real battleground. That would come later. And when it did, I wouldn't be pushed anywhere I didn't want to go. Back at the table, dessert had been served. A glossy chocolate torte that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I picked at it with my fork, my appetite gone, my ears tuned to scraps of conversation around me. Each mention of future plans or next steps tightened something in my chest. At one point, I heard Matthew telling a colleague, "We've got some renovations lined up for next year. Shouldn't be too hard once the paperwork's all settled." Claire chimed in with a laugh. "We just have to convince her it's for the best." They didn't say my name, but they didn't need to. I kept my eyes on the torte, pretending not to hear. When the speeches began, I clapped politely. When the toasts were raised, I lifted my glass. I smiled in all the right places, but each gesture felt like a mask I'd slipped on for the evening. At last, when people began drifting toward the door, I found my coat. Yes, still hanging in the hallway closet where I'd left it before bathing, and slipped outside. The cold night air wrapped around me like something honest. I didn't leave immediately. I stood at the edge of the driveway, looking back at the house. Through the dining room window, I could see Claire moving plates, Matthew laughing with someone, Lily hugging a guest goodbye. It was a beautiful picture if you didn't know the missing parts. I thought about the account withdrawals I'd authorized over the years, quiet, unquestioned. About the credit card bills I'd paid just to help out this month. About the signed checks that had bought their cars, their holidays, their dinners in restaurants like this one. No more. I'd made that decision back at the table when I heard them speak about my house like a prize in a raffle. I would not fund my own erasure. The street was quiet as I walked toward the corner, heels clicking softly. My car was parked half a block away, old, reliable, paid for in cash years ago. I drove home slowly, letting the warmth of the engine and the hum of the tires calm me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the plan had solidified. Tomorrow, I would call the bank. Not next week, not when I had the time. Tomorrow, I would freeze every automatic payment, revoke every access point they had to my accounts, and set things in order for someone who actually valued me. And for the first time in a long while, the thought didn't make me feel guilty. It made me feel lighter. Inside, I hung the rose satin dress on the back of the bedroom door. My hair smelled faintly of the party. Perfume, candle wax, the ghost of champagne. I sat on the edge of the bed, kicked off Lily's silver shoes, and let the silence of my own home fold around me. I'd been treated like a problem to be managed, hidden away. But tomorrow, they'd find out I was neither invisible nor helpless. I didn't sleep much that night, but for once it wasn't because of restlessness or aching joints. It was because my mind was clear, steady, and set on something I should have done years ago. By the time the first light of morning slipped through the curtains, I was already sitting at the kitchen table with my old leather address book, my reading glasses perched low on my nose, and the phone in front of me. The bank's number was circled in blue ink, one of the few things I'd never stored on the mobile. I made tea, strong and dark, and let it sit untouched while I dialed. The line clicked, and a bright young voice answered. "Good morning, Westford Savings and Trust. This is Amanda. How may I help you today?" "Good morning," I said evenly. "My name is Marion Lawson. I'd like to speak to someone about revoking all automatic transfers and third-party access to my accounts." There was a pause on the line. "All of them?" "Yes, everyone," I said, keeping my tone calm. "And I'd like that to happen immediately." She hesitated. "Mrs. Lawson, that's quite a significant change." "May I ask?" "You may ask, but I won't be discussing family matters with the bank," I interrupted, not unkindly. "What I do need is for you to confirm that no one can use my accounts but me, starting now." Her voice brightened in the way people do when they realize they won't get more than the essentials. "Understood, Mrs. Lawson. I can temporarily suspend all authorizations until you sign the full revocation forms in person. That will be fine. I'll come in this afternoon." While she typed, I thought of Claire's face last night when she saw me in Lily's dress. The tightening jaw, the flash of something between embarrassment and annoyance. It wasn't just about the evening, it was about control. And the easiest way to control someone is to keep them financially dependent, or in my case, financially generous. "All authorizations are suspended as of now," Amanda said. "This includes linked cards, scheduled payments, and standing orders." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. "I'll see you later today to finalize the paperwork." After I hung up, I took my tea to the living room and stood looking at the mantel. Photos of my late husband, of Lily as a toddler, of Claire in her 20s, when she still looked at me like she saw a person, not an inconvenience, watched me back in silence. It's a peculiar thing, realizing that the people you've built your life around have built theirs on the assumption that you'll always be there to prop them up. You don't see the change happen. It's like a tide creeping in. One day, you're the center of the room. The next, you're the rug they've decided doesn't match the decor anymore. I spent the rest of the morning going through my files. I pulled out a thick folder marked House Maple Street and another for savings. Every check stub, every signed slip, every transfer I'd made to Claire over the years. It was all there. The down payment on her first house. The lump sum to help with moving expenses when she married Matthew. Thousands more for renovations, vacations, private school fees for Lily. It added up to more than I'd let myself acknowledge. Just after lunch, I put on my coat and walked the 3 blocks to the bank. The air was crisp, the kind that stings your cheeks just enough to remind you you're alive. Inside, the familiar scent of polished wood and printer toner greeted me. Amanda met me at the counter, her smile polite but curious. She ushered me to a small office where I signed form after form. Each stroke of the pen felt like cutting a thread that had been wrapped too tightly around me for too long. When we were finished, she slid the final copy toward me. "You now have sole control of your accounts, Mrs. Lawson. No one else has access." I thanked her again, tucked the folder under my arm, and stepped back out into the cold. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying something heavy home with me. I felt lighter, sharper, more myself than I had in a long while. The next step I knew would be harder. Visiting my lawyer to change my will. That would mean putting my intentions in writing, legally, so no one could twist them after I was gone. But I wasn't afraid of that anymore. They'd spent last night talking about me as if I were an obstacle in the way of their plans. Today, I'd begun removing myself from those plans altogether, and I couldn't think of a more fitting gift to myself. By the time I reached Harold Kent's office, the winter afternoon light had gone that silvery gray that makes everything look like it's been dipped in dust. Harold had been my lawyer for nearly 25 years, ever since my husband and I had drawn up our first wills. He was older now, a little heavier in the middle, with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and a tie that never seemed quite straight. But his handshake was still warm, and his eyes still held that keen, unflinching intelligence that made me trust him. "Marion," he said, gesturing me into the same leather chair I'd sat in for so many life-changing conversations. "It's been too long. What brings you in?" "I'm here to make some changes," I said, sliding my folder onto his desk. "And I want them airtight." He studied my face for a moment, perhaps hearing in my voice that I wasn't here for minor adjustments. "All right. Tell me." I laid it out plainly. No tears, no embellishment. that I no longer wished Claire or Matthew to be beneficiaries of my estate, that my house, savings, and investments should be placed into a trust for Lily, accessible only after she turned 30, that I wanted provisions ensuring no one else could access or sell the house while I was alive, under any circumstance. Harold listened without interruption, only occasionally jotting down a note. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. I can do all that. But Marion, this is a decisive step. Are you certain? Harold, I said, my voice steady. My daughter locked me in a bathroom last night to keep me from attending a party for my own granddaughter. She and her husband are making plans for my house as if I've already left this earth. Yes, I'm certain. He nodded slowly. Then we'll proceed. I'll draft the revisions today. You can come back tomorrow to review and sign. While he typed, I looked around his office. The shelves were lined with law books, but also with framed photographs, his wife, their children, a golden retriever sprawled on a porch. It struck me that family, at its best, was about safety and loyalty, and at its worst, well, it could be the opposite. When Harold slid the draft across the desk, I read every word. The clauses were clear, the conditions strict. There would be no loopholes for Claire to exploit, no vague phrases to twist. Lily would be protected, and so would I. As I initialed each page, I felt something shift inside me. A release, like untying a knot that had been cutting into my hands for years. When the last signature was done, Harold gathered the papers. We'll file everything by the end of the week. And Marion, if anyone tries to pressure you about this, you call me immediately. I will, I promised, standing. And Harold, thank you for listening without judgment. Not judgment, he said with a faint smile. Admiration. Not everyone has the courage to reclaim their life in their 70s. Outside, the air was sharper now, the early dark settling in. The streetlights had come on, casting little circles of gold on the sidewalk. I walked past shop windows glowing with warm light, their displays of winter coats and glittering scarves reflecting back my faint silhouette. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked the same. Same silver hair, same lined face, but I felt different. Not younger, exactly. Just stronger. On the way home, I stopped at the bakery and bought a small lemon tart. It had been years since I'd bought dessert just for myself. At home, I brewed a fresh cup of tea, cut a slice of the tart, and sat at the kitchen table in silence. The phone rang twice while I ate, once from Claire, once from Matthew. I let both go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear their voices, not until the papers were filed and my account secured. By the time I washed the plate and turned out the kitchen light, I knew the next conversation we had would be on my terms. I wasn't erasing them from my life entirely, but I was making sure they understood something they'd forgotten. My place in this family is not theirs to decide, and neither is my future. I didn't plan to call Claire. Not yet. I wanted time for the ink on Harold's documents to dry, for the bank records to show what I'd done. It was a strange kind of patience, not the weary waiting I'd done for years, hoping she'd treat me differently, but the deliberate pause of someone who knows she holds the stronger hand. 2 days passed without a word from me, though the phone rang constantly. Claire, Matthew, even Lily called twice, though her messages were softer, more hesitant. By the 3rd morning, I heard the crunch of tires in my driveway. I was at the kitchen table halfway through my tea when the front doorbell rang. Long, insistent. I didn't rush to answer. Let her stand there for a minute, the way I'd been left standing in the hallway of her house, listening to the muffled sounds of a party I was meant to attend. When I finally opened the door, Claire stood on the porch in her camel coat, scarf wound tight around her neck. Her expression was composed, but the sharpness in her eyes gave her away. "Mother," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." I closed the door, unhurried. "Do we?" She turned to face me, arms folded. "I've been trying to call you for days. Matthew and I are concerned. We heard from the bank that all the automatic payments have been stopped." "That's correct," I said. Her eyebrows lifted. "May I ask why?" "You may," I said, moving past her toward the living room. "But the answer won't change anything." She followed, perching on the edge of the sofa like someone bracing for turbulence. "If this is about the other night, it is about the other night," I interrupted, settling into my chair. "And about every other night, weekend and holiday, when I've been quietly sidelined. It's about the way you took my clothes while I was bathing so you could keep me out of sight at my granddaughter's engagement party." Her face flushed. "That's not. Mother, you're making it sound." "I'm making it sound exactly as it happened." My voice was calm, almost too calm. "And I am no longer financing people who treat me as an embarrassment to be hidden." She leaned forward, her tone shifting from defensive to coaxing. "You're overreacting. You know how I am about presentation, about making sure events go smoothly. I didn't want any distractions." "Then you should have budgeted for them yourself," I said. "Not with my money. Not anymore." For a moment, she simply stared at me, as if recalibrating the conversation in her head. "Do you realize," she said slowly, "how much you've been helping us? The house, Lily's tuition, I realize it very well," I said, holding her gaze. "Better than you do, apparently. And that help has ended." Her mouth tightened. "So that's it? You're cutting us off?" I sipped my tea before answering. "I'm redirecting my resources to people who actually want me in their lives." There was a flicker in her eyes, hurt, perhaps, or anger, before she stood. "This isn't just about money, Mother. This is about family." "Yes," I said. "And family is about respect. You've forgotten that." She grabbed her scarf, winding it tight as she moved toward the door. "You'll regret this," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Perhaps," I replied, "but I doubt it." When the door closed behind her, I let out a slow breath. My hands were steady. My heart was steady. I'd spent a lifetime swallowing words to keep the peace. This time, I'd said exactly what needed saying. The phone rang an hour after Claire left. When I saw Lily's name on the screen, I answered without hesitation. "Grandma," she said, her voice quick and breathless. "Mom's upset. She came home and wouldn't say much, but I know it's about you. Did you two fight?" I leaned back in my chair, the afternoon light pooling across the rug. "We talked," I said, "and I told her I won't be giving her money anymore." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh?" Then, more softly, "I guess I can't say I'm surprised." I smiled faintly. "You knew?" "I've noticed things," Lily admitted. "The way she talks about you when you're not around, how she complains about you being difficult if you don't agree with something. It always made me uncomfortable." The honesty in her voice warmed me in a way I hadn't felt since she was a little girl. "I'm sorry you've had to hear those things," I said. "I'm sorry you've had to live with them," she replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear faint street noise on her end, cars passing, a dog barking somewhere. Then she said, Can I come over? I don't want to talk about this on the phone. I agreed, and 40 minutes later, she was sitting at my kitchen table, a paper bag from the bakery between us. I brought scones, she said, unwrapping them. You probably haven't eaten. She wasn't wrong. My appetite had been patchy lately, but now the smell of warm pastry and butter filled the kitchen, and I realized how hungry I was. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before she set her cup down. Grandma, I don't care about the money. I never have. But I do care about you being treated right. And you haven't been. Her bluntness was refreshing. No hedging, no polite avoidance, just truth. I've let it go for too long, I admitted. Partly because I thought it was easier. Partly because I suppose I didn't want to believe my own daughter could see me that way. Lily's eyes were clear and steady. It's not your fault she does, but you don't have to put up with it. I know, I said. That's why I've taken steps. Her eyebrows lifted. Steps? I told her about the bank, about Harold, about the trust I'd set up in her name for when she turned 30. She listened without interrupting, though her fingers tightened around her mug. That's a lot, she said finally. You're sure? Absolutely, I said. I don't want you to feel beholden to me, Lily. But I also want to make sure the people who actually care about me are the ones who benefit from what I've built. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Thank you, she said softly. Not for the money. For trusting me, for seeing me. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. You've always seen me, too, even when it wasn't fashionable in this family. We talked for another hour, not just about Claire and Matthew, but about her wedding plans, her work, the little apartment she and her fiancé were setting up. It felt like what family should be. Shared space without performance, conversation without hidden agendas. When she left, she hugged me tight, the way she had when she was small and didn't want to let go. Don't let them wear you down, she whispered. I won't, I promised. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I meant it. After the door closed, I stood for a moment in the quiet house, looking at the 2 mugs on the table, the half-empty plate of scones. The emptiness didn't feel lonely tonight. It felt mine. I knew the storm with Claire wasn't over, but now I had my anchor, someone who understood, and that made all the difference. It was 3 days before I saw them again. Not just Claire this time, but Matthew too. They arrived together on a Saturday morning, unannounced, their car pulling up with that smooth purr expensive engines make. I watched from the front window as they sat for a moment, clearly deciding who would speak first. When they came to the door, Matthew was the one who rang the bell. I opened it, and there they were, Claire in her tailored coat, Matthew in a charcoal suit as if we were about to discuss a business merger rather than family matters. Mother, Claire said, her voice bright in a way that set my teeth on edge. We thought we'd come by and clear the air. I stepped aside without answering, letting them in. If they were expecting coffee and cake, they'd be disappointed. Matthew got straight to it once we were in the living room. We're concerned about the recent financial changes you've made. We think there may have been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said, taking my seat in my armchair. I decided my money should go where I choose, not where I'm told. Claire perched on the sofa's edge, her posture perfect, her smile practiced. Mother, we've always appreciated your generosity. That generosity, I cut in, was never meant to be an entitlement. and it certainly wasn't meant to buy my absence from family events. Her cheeks flushed. That's not fair. The other night was complicated. Yes, I said. It was. For you. I imagine it's hard to host a party when your mother might embarrass you simply by existing. Matthew shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. Let's be reasonable. We've made plans for the house. I held up a hand. Stop right there. The house is not yours to plan for. It never will be. His jaw tightened, but he forced a polite tone. We're just trying to think ahead. You're not getting any younger and managing a property. I've managed this property for 40 years, I said sharply. And I'll manage it until I decide otherwise. That decision won't involve you. Claire's voice dropped to that quiet, coaxing tone she used when trying to close a deal. Mother, please, we can work something out. If this is about feeling included, we can... This is about respect, I said, my voice steady, which can't be negotiated back into existence after being taken for granted. They exchanged a glance, one of those silent marital conferences that happen in a blink. Matthew leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Look, this is going to cause tension, not just between us but in the family. Lily, I interrupted, understands why I'm doing this. She was here. We spoke. That caught them off guard. Claire's eyes narrowed. You told her? I did, I said. Because I trust her, and because she deserves honesty. For a moment, the room was very still. Then Claire stood abruptly, smoothing her coat. If you think this will make you happy, Mother, fine. But don't expect us to come running the next time you need something. I rose too, meeting her eyes. I wouldn't dream of it. Matthew followed her out, his expression carefully neutral. The door closed with a muted click, and I stood for a long moment in the quiet. I wasn't shaken. Not anymore. Their words had no hooks left in me. I'd expected anger, guilt, attempts at persuasion. I'd expected them to try to make me feel small. Instead, I felt taller. It's a strange relief realizing there's nothing more they can take from you once you've already taken back what matters most. Yourself. The following Tuesday, I had company I actually wanted. Margaret showed up just after lunch, knocking lightly before letting herself in, as she's done for the past 30 years. She carried a paper bag from the deli and 2 thermoses of tea. I heard you've been stirring the pot, she said with a grin as she set the food on the table. Thought I'd come see for myself if you were still alive and kicking. I laughed, really laughed, the kind that shakes the shoulders. Alive, kicking, and apparently persona non grata in certain circles. We sat down with sandwiches, the kitchen filling with the smell of fresh bread and mustard. I told her everything, from the night of the party to the visit from Claire and Matthew. She didn't interrupt, though I saw her eyebrows lift more than once. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, arms folded. About time, she said simply. I blinked. About time for what? For you to stop letting them treat you like the hired help, she said. You've been giving and giving, Marion, until there's nothing left but the crumbs you save for yourself. And for what? So they can talk about you like a problem to solve? Her bluntness hit like a gust of fresh air. Margaret had always been like that. No sugarcoating, no tiptoeing around hard truths. I suppose I kept hoping it was just a phase, I said quietly. That one day she'd remember I'm her mother, not a prop she can hide in the wings. Margaret reached across the table, giving my hand a squeeze. You're more than her mother. You're you. And if they can't see that, then they don't deserve the best of you or your money. We finished lunch, and then she pulled out a tin of shortbread she'd baked. For later, she said, though I broke into it immediately. The simple pleasure of buttery biscuits and hot tea with someone who saw me clearly was worth more than any grand gesture. After she left, I found myself thinking about her words. You're more than her mother. I'd spent so many years defining myself by my role in other people's lives, wife, mother, grandmother, that I'd almost forgotten there was a me outside of those titles. That afternoon, I went for a walk, something I hadn't done in weeks. The air was crisp, the sun low enough to throw long shadows across the pavement. I passed neighbors I'd known for decades, stopping to chat with Mrs. Patel about her garden, waving to the mailman. These small connections, I realized, had been my quiet foundation all along. When I reached the park, I sat on a bench and watched children chase each other across the grass. Their laughter carried on the wind, bright and unfiltered. I thought of Lily at that age, her hair flying behind her, her cheeks flushed from running. She'd always run to me, not away. That hadn't changed. On the walk home, I decided I would invite her over for dinner soon, not as a peacekeeping gesture, not to smooth things over with Claire, but simply because I wanted to see her. Back at the house, I made myself a proper meal: grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, a small glass of wine. I ate at the dining table instead of in front of the television. It was a small thing, but it felt deliberate, as if I were saying to myself, I'm worth setting the table for. Later, as I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The same silver hair, the same lined face, but something in my eyes had changed. They looked settled, like a person who had stopped waiting for permission to live her own life. It was almost a week before I heard from Claire again. This time she didn't show up with Matthew. She came alone, mid-afternoon, knocking softly instead of leaning on the bell. When I opened the door, she was holding a small bouquet of lilies, white, long-stemmed, wrapped in tissue. For you, she said, her voice unusually tentative. I took them, thanked her, and stepped aside. She came in without the brisk confidence she usually wore, glancing around the living room as if she half expected someone else to be here. I wanted to apologize, she began, sitting on the edge of the sofa, for the party, for the way things happened. I sat across from her, the flowers resting in my lap. All right, I said. Go on. She hesitated, eyes dropping to her hands. I shouldn't have taken your clothes. It was wrong. I was just caught up in wanting everything to be perfect. There was sincerity in her tone, but also that old, practiced note I knew too well, the one that often preceded a request. I appreciate you saying that, I said, but an apology doesn't erase the years of small cuts that came before it. Her eyes flicked up. I know. And I want to do better. I don't want us to be at odds. I waited. And then it came. Matthew and I have been talking, she continued, and we think maybe we could help each other. If you'd reconsider the financial changes, just for certain things, we could make sure you're more involved in... I raised a hand. Claire, stop. She froze, her mouth still open slightly. We are not negotiating my worth, I said evenly. And we are not tying my presence in this family to my bank account. That time is over. Her shoulders stiffened. It's not about that. It's about security, planning ahead. You know the house will be a lot to manage as you get older. I've made arrangements for that, I said. On my terms. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She sat back, crossing her arms. You've changed, she said, not quite accusing, not quite admiring. I've stopped pretending, I replied. There's a difference. The quiet between us was heavy, but not the old, uneasy kind. This was a stillness that said the ground had shifted, and she was deciding whether to stand on it or step away. Finally, she rose. Well, I suppose that's that. It is, I said, standing too. But Claire, if you want to visit, if you want to talk, you don't need an excuse. Just come, as my daughter, not as a negotiator. Her lips pressed together, her gaze searching mine for something. She didn't answer, just nodded once and headed for the door. When it closed behind her, I carried the lilies into the kitchen and set them in water. They looked stark and beautiful against the counter, their petals opening slowly in the afternoon light. I didn't know if she'd be back soon, or if this was her last attempt to pull me back into her orbit. But either way, I felt no panic, no urge to run after her. The line had been drawn, and it would stay where I'd put it. That night, I sat by the window with a book, the quiet of the house wrapping around me. The lilies were visible from my chair, their white blooms catching the lamplight. I thought about how they'd looked when she handed them to me, closed tight, careful. And how, given a little time and the right space, they'd opened on their own. Some things do. The call came from Lily on a Friday evening. Her voice had that warm lift to it that always made me picture her as a little girl again, calling from the garden to show me something she'd found. Grandma, we're having a few people over tomorrow night, just a small dinner. I'd really like you to come. No big speeches, no stiff clothes, just us. I didn't have to think twice. I'd love to, I said. The next day, I put on a soft blue sweater and a pair of trousers that were comfortable but neat. I braided my hair back, tied it with a ribbon, and baked a lemon drizzle cake, one of Lily's favorites. It felt good to prepare something for someone who'd actually want me there. Her apartment was small but inviting, warm light spilling from the windows when I arrived. She opened the door before I even knocked, wrapping me in a hug that smelled faintly of rosemary and garlic. Inside, there were only 6 of us. Lily, her fiancé Matthew, not my son-in-law Matthew, but a different, kinder Matthew, 2 friends of theirs, and an elderly neighbor who'd brought a basket of bread. The table was set simply, but beautifully, with mismatched plates and a little vase of daisies in the center. As we ate, conversation flowed easily. No careful image management, no side whispers about future plans. Just talk about books, travel dreams, recipes gone wrong, and the neighbor's mischievous cat who'd once stolen a pork chop right off a plate. Lily's Matthew was attentive, asking me questions about the garden, my favorite travel memories, even my late husband. He listened, really listened, as if my words mattered. And when I laughed at one of his stories, it wasn't the polite, measured sound I'd given at Claire's parties. It was genuine, spilling out before I could temper it. Halfway through the meal, Lily leaned over and said quietly, "This is what I want my family to feel like. Not forced, not staged." I squeezed her hand under the table. "It can be," I said, "if you keep it this way." When dinner was over, we lingered at the table, sipping tea and nibbling at the lemon cake. The neighbor told a story about his late wife, how she used to put extra sugar in his tea when she knew he'd had a hard day. And for a moment, the room went quiet. Not out of discomfort, but in that shared space where everyone's heart beats in the same rhythm. Before I left, Lily packed me a small basket with leftovers, insisting I take it. At the door, she hugged me again. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I hope you know you're always welcome here." I nodded, but words felt too small for what I wanted to say. Instead, I just held her a moment longer, breathing in the certainty that here, at least here, I was wanted for who I was, not for what I could provide. The night air was cool as I walked to my car, the street lamp casting soft light over the pavement. My hands were warm from carrying the basket, my chest warmer still from the evening. I thought of the long table at Claire's party, the polite smiles, the undercurrent of calculation, and I thought of this small, mismatched table with its daisies and its laughter. If you'd asked me a month ago which one felt like family, I might have hesitated. Not anymore. The morning after Lily's dinner, I woke earlier than usual, not from habit, but from a kind of stillness inside me that I hadn't felt in years. No rush of worry about who might be calling, no dread about what uncomfortable conversation might be waiting. Just quiet. The house was cool, the air faintly scented with the lilies Claire had brought a week ago. They'd opened fully now, pale and unashamed, their petals bending in a slow, graceful surrender to the light. I made coffee instead of tea, just for a change, and carried it into the living room. The early sun lay across the rug like a soft blanket. From my chair by the window, I could see the street slowly coming to life. Dog walkers, a boy on his bike, the postman with his satchel. For years, my mornings had been a list of what needed to be done for other people. A check to post, a bill to cover, a meal to prepare for a gathering where I'd be tucked at the edge. I don't think I ever noticed how much of myself I'd poured out without leaving any to drink from. Now, I noticed everything. The way the light hit the mantel, making the dust motes dance. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The faint crackle of the newspaper as I turned a page. Ordinary things, but they felt like mine again. I thought about the past weeks, the bath, the missing clothes, the walk into that party wearing Lily's dress. It seemed like such a small act now, but maybe that was where the change began. Not with the bank or the lawyer, not even with the confrontations, but with the choice to walk back into that room when I could have hidden. I thought about Claire. I didn't hate her. Anger wasn't the right word either. What I felt was a kind of acceptance of who she was and who I couldn't be for her anymore. If she came around again, I'd open the door. But I wouldn't open my accounts or my dignity just to keep the peace. The coffee cooled in my hands as I let my thoughts wander to Lily. She'd have her wedding soon, her own home, her own life to build. I felt peace knowing that when I was gone, what I had would go to someone who saw me, not the version her mother tried to shape, but me. I finished the coffee, rinsed the cup, and set it in the sink. Outside, the day was brightening. Somewhere down the street, a child was laughing, the sound carrying easily in the crisp air. I went to the garden, pulling on my cardigan against the chill. The soil was damp from last night's rain, and tiny green shoots were poking through where I'd planted bulbs in the autumn. They'd been waiting in the dark all winter, patient and unseen, until it was time to grow. Maybe that's all I'd been doing too, waiting. And now I'd finally pushed through. When I came back inside, I found myself smiling without any particular reason. Not because anything grand had happened, not because I'd won some battle, but because the ground under my feet felt like mine again. I don't know if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I hope you haven't. But if you have, I want you to hear me. You don't need anyone's permission to be seen. And you certainly don't have to buy your place at the table. It took me 74 years, a stolen set of clothes, and one rose-colored dress to remember that. I hope it takes you less. So if you've been quiet for too long, if you've let your worth be measured in what you can give instead of who you are, stop. Today. Not next month, not when it's easier. Take back your seat, your voice, your life. Because you're not just part of someone else's story. You're the one holding the pen.